Let's hit it. And welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori La Beywith, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort. All right, here we go. What you think about, you will bring about. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori La Beywith, the founder and the daughter of a mother who lived with dementia for 30 years. If you liked our opening song by Claire, it's called Caregiving Calls by the Mark Arneson Band. You can download that on any of your favorite music platforms. For those of you that are new here today to Alzheimer Speaks, we're True Talk Radio, and we're about sound information, not just sound bites. And our goal is to raise all voices, big and small, from those diagnosed to those that care and serve them, to advocates and researchers, and so much more. Today is a live show, and you can join the conversation if you'd like by dialing in at 323-870-4602. That's 323-870-4602. And as always, I want to thank our listeners, your likes, your clicks, and shares. You just keep pushing out our resources here at Alzheimer Speaks, and I really appreciate that. It really helps build a sense of community and comfort and collaboration. And again, I think that's the only way we're gonna beat this disease is to battle it together. Some of you may not know that Lewy Body Awareness is in October. And also I wanted to give a shout out to Us Against Alzheimer's. They are doing their summit. They started yesterday and it'll go through the 21st. You can just go to usagainsalzheimers.org to find out more information about that. And today's show is going to be about what the heck happens when caregiving taps you on the shoulder. And we are so lucky to have Dr. Aaron Blight with us. But before I introduce him, I always like to give some shout outs and tell you about our upcoming shows and a couple of our past shows. So coming up this week, we are going to be interviewing the director and producer for the film Determined, which has been a passion of love and a project of hope that this group has been working on for many, many years. And so I'm really excited to talk about that. We, following that, next week on Tuesday, we're going to be talking with IBM, and they're going to talk to us about Alzheimer's disease and artificial intelligence, which will be really interesting. And then just recently we had Val on from the UK, who is living with dementia, and she had some great insights that she shared with us. We also talked with Immune Bio and Amika, both on some great new technology they're working on that is non-invasive testing, which is pretty cool. Now, let me see, where do I start? I've got so many shout outs. I ran across a new thing today that a friend of mine over in the UK sent, and it's called the Wednesday Wave, and it's from 3 p.m. on October 14th to December 16th, and it's by the vamostheatre.co.uk, and just go to their Arts in Projects page to find more information out about the Wednesday Wave. And then Dementia Action Alliance is starting some online programs that are pretty cool. They have some for individual people who are living with dementia as well as community settings. And you can just go to daanow.org to get more information on that. And let's see, we've got a memory cafe coming up with Artist Senior Living in Minnesota, in Woodbury. The Artist Way Memory Cafe will be October 21st. and that's always on the third Wednesday of the month at 1 o'clock. It's virtual, so anybody around the world can join us there. You can find more information by contacting me. And then I also facilitate another group, Arthur's Memory Cafe here in Minnesota, which was one of the first memory cafes in the U.S., and our next meeting will be on the 28th at 1 o'clock, and we meet the second and the fourth Wednesday. Again, both of those are virtual now, so anybody is welcome. And I am working on a project with a partner that I'm really excited about. So we've been doing some teasers. So this is our teaser for today. Does the thought of dementia disrupt your sleep and sidetrack your mind during the day? We believe it helps to get through tough times when you feel supported. Watch for our exciting rollout November 10th, just 3 weeks from today. We believe it's going to make you feel very supported and welcome. So I'll be giving you little teasers on that as we creep up to November 10th. Just have a couple more shout-outs to do. Coral Health is still letting people download 2 of their apps, Music First and Coral Faith. You can just go to Coral, that's CORO health.com to find that out. And then, of course, if you are looking for another memory cafe anywhere in the U.S., and I think Dave's up to like 5 countries now, you can go to memorycafedirectory.com. You'll find out more about these wonderful support groups that, I hate to even call them a support group because there's some negative connotations that go with that because they really are a gathering of friends. But check memorycafedirectory.com. And then I want to give one last shout out to the brain health survey done by MDVIP. And just go to our homepage and you can find out more about that. Let's hear from the footbar walker, and then we'll have our discussion with Aaron.
Introducing the life-changing footbar walker.
I'm Peggy from Danville, Kentucky, and I'm 91 years old. The footbar walker revolutionized my care of George. The saving that I made from having to put him in a nursing home came to about $192,000. The footbar walker opens and closes just like a standard walker. The only thing that is different is the top bar and the foot bar. Does that ever make a difference?
Does someone you love use a walker? Do they struggle to get up from a seated position? Are you a caregiver dealing with physical pain and stress as you help your patient? The footbar walker was designed to assist not only the patient, but also the caregiver. Patients have more control standing up, and no lifting from the caregiver is required. See how it works at thefootbarwalker.com. That's thefootbarwalker.com. Peggy, would you recommend the footbar walker?
Do I ever? I would not be in the health that I'm in today at this age had it not been for the footbar walker.
Well, let's get to our program today. I'm really excited to have Dr. Aaron Blight with us. He is the author of a brand new book called When Caregiving Calls, Guidance as You Care for a Parent, Spouse, or Aging Relative. And the book was just released, and so I can't wait to talk to him about this. Dr. Blight is the founder of Caregiving Kinetics, which is a consulting firm dedicated to those who care for our aging population. He has personally served as a family caregiver. He was a home care company owner, a caregiving scholar, and a leader at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So welcome, Dr. Blight. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Lori. Thank you for having me today.
Well, I'm so excited to have this conversation. Your book just looks fascinating, and I know our listeners will think so as well. Now, I always ask everybody who's on the show before I kind of get into my line of questions if they've been personally touched in their own circle of friends or family by some form of dementia.
Well, my mother-in-law, she had a brain tumor, and I was working at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services at the time. It was a completely unexpected diagnosis, and she received radiation and chemotherapy and 2 brain surgeries. And as a result of that, she was in a state of cognitive decline for the rest of her life, for about 5.5 years. She did not have Alzheimer's, but she did have aphasia, and her cognition was just slowly deteriorating. So we lived through that, and then later, as I owned my home care company, I was able to interact with a lot of people who had Alzheimer's disease, our clients, and so it has definitely hit close to home for me.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. It doesn't, I always tell people, it doesn't make any difference if you have or not. It's just nice to kind of get that background. For you, since you have been touched in a variety of ways by caregiving, can you tell us how it entered your life? Because a lot of times it just kind of creeps up on us and snatches us away. We don't really see it coming.
Yeah, for us, it happened very abruptly. I was in the federal Medicaid program. I was actually in the Disabled and Elderly Health Programs group of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So I was writing national healthcare policy for elderly and disabled people. And if I'm being honest with you, though, Lori, I didn't really understand a whole lot about being elderly or disabled at that time in my life. I was 29 years old. But my mother-in-law got this diagnosis, and she had a brain tumor. She needed immediate brain surgery. They gave her weeks to live. If she had the brain surgery and she survived the operation, she would maybe live 6 to 9 months. That's what the doctors projected. So, of course, she had the brain surgery, and then she moved into our home. She was going to be in our home for a couple of weeks just as she recovered from the brain surgery. And as it turns out, she stayed in our home for a couple of years and went through all the radiation, chemotherapy treatments, a second brain surgery, and she ended up living 5.5 years. And that was my experience and my introduction to family caregiving. So it happened pretty much overnight.
Interesting. With my mom, she had dementia, but she had a really tough time getting it diagnosed. She knew something was wrong. My dad and I knew something was wrong. No one else really knew. We didn't talk to others about it. And so that was kind of a frustrating process of knowing that you're caring, but not even knowing what to do because you don't know what it is. But my dad, too, had a brain tumor, and it was just bing, bam, boom. He's in for an appointment, and the next thing you know, they're shipping him down to the hospital and in the cities here and saying we're not sure he's even going to make it through the surgery, and then gave him like a year to a year and a half, and he lived 4.5 years. So on that side of it, I really can relate to what you went through because stories are super, super similar there. And we were both lucky. They lived a lot longer than they thought they were going to. I want to ask you, because I always find it fascinating, why did you decide to write your book, When Caregiving Calls, Guidance as You Care for a Parent, a Spouse, or an Aging Relative?
Well, Lori, to be honest, I felt compelled to write the book. I felt like this was something that I needed to do. I received an unsolicited offer to sell my business a few years ago, and after a lot of thought and soul searching, I chose to do that. And then I kind of asked myself, what's next? I've had this home care company, and now I don't. And I realized that between my healthcare policy experience, my family caregiving, my home care company as a business, and then also my study of caregiving as a phenomenon of social science, that I couldn't just leave that all on the shelf. I had to do something to try to help caregivers because I know that caregivers can benefit from some support and assistance. So I decided to write the book, and I'm just super excited that it's out there now.
Yeah, what a process. I've thought about writing one, and I've been doing this since 2009, and I still have, and I've got a couple of them in me, but I keep doing other projects. And, people I don't think understand what a commitment it takes to really sit down and focus and write a book. The time commitment, a lot of times the emotional drain because you're reliving things all over again.
Yeah.
But I find it so interesting that so many people are drawn to make a difference because they just say, there's got to be an easier way for the next one down this path because this wasn't such a smooth process. Did you feel that too? I know I sure did. It was just like, hey, where's the support? Where's everybody?
Absolutely, Lori. When my wife and I were going through family caregiving, we didn't have a clue what we were doing. We didn't know anything about the supports that were available to us. This was back in the days before a lot of the online services and supports are out there for caregivers. But we just fumbled through it and just did the best that we could. And it was not until years later when I started studying caregiving and getting into the research on caregiving that I started to really understand the fundamental challenges and the reasons why caregiving can be so difficult. And so I try to share some of that knowledge in the book. And to your point about, the time, how difficult it is to write a book, I started writing this book a couple of years ago. And you've probably read some books where the author goes on and on and on and doesn't really say anything new. I did not want to write one of those books. I wanted my book to be concise and accessible, easy to read, easy to relate to for caregivers. And so I got a good chunk of it done, but it was only about 23,000 words. It wasn't long enough to be a book. And the manuscript languished there for probably about a year. I just didn't have the inspiration or the interest maybe to add more to it. And then I was able to pick it back up, and I just started, new life was breathed into the book, and I was able to complete it.
Mm-hmm. It is funny how everything really happens in the proper timing. To push it out, it probably wouldn't have made sense prior. Putting it even in a different format to a workbook or a pamphlet versus an actual book, and then being able to be kind of rejuvenated in spirit to sit back down and write some more and formulate it. Why don't you tell us who is your primary target for the book, and then let's talk about how the book is laid out, so what people can expect if they go purchase it.
So the book is written for family caregivers, and there was a report that came out earlier this year from the AARP and the National Alliance for Caregiving that estimated that just in the United States alone, there are about 53 million family caregivers in America. And so that's a little over 1 in 5 adults who have provided some sort of informal caregiving for a loved one in the last year. I mean, that's a huge number of people. But so caregiving is kind of ubiquitous. It affects so many people, but at the same time, it's not readily recognized in our society. And caregivers don't get the kind of support that they need. They often feel like they're, relegated to a situation where their needs are not met, and they're spending so much time focused on their loved one, who is a patient in the healthcare system, that it's easy to say, well, they have their needs are so obvious. Who am I to try to get any support for myself? So they sacrifice themselves and devote so much of their time and their hands and their heart to the service of caregiving that this book was written to try to help them.
Well, and don't you find, too, that so many people don't even recognize themselves as a caregiver? They're a spouse, they're an adult child, they're a friend. And so what they do is because they love somebody. It's not because of this title. And so I know I went to a meeting. They were rolling out it was a big AARP thing here in Minnesota years ago. And they were talking about how people didn't recognize themselves as caregivers. And I'm like, well, that's because of the terms you're using. You're not humanizing them in their individual roles that even put them in that situation. They're in relationships, and it was kind of fun. They're like, oh my gosh, you're right. No wonder they don't see it. They see a caregiver as somebody else doing something, not something they're doing. Because a lot of times people want to, not all the time. Sometimes, families feel pulled too in that direction. Let's go into how the book is laid out in terms of flow and things. How did you structure it that'll make it easy for families to find information?
Well, the book is organized into 18 different chapters. Each chapter talks about something that is central in the caregiving experience, either for the caregiver or the care receiver or both. And the chapters, would you like me to read them to you real quick? They're real quick. They're really
Sure.
Okay. The chapters are conversation, roles, relationship, family, time, stress, work, body, mind, home, independence, loneliness, emotion, providers, skills, rewards, faith, and next steps. And after each chapter, and each chapter is like I said, it's an easy to read, relatable discussion of that topic. And after each chapter, I've included questions for reflection. And there are anywhere from 3 to 6 questions for the caregiver to ask themselves at the end of the chapter. And the intent of those questions is to allow the caregiver to really think deeply about their caregiving experience and their situation, their care receiver, and gain insights as to how they can do a better job for themselves and for their loved one while they're caregiving. One of the early readers of the manuscript, we talked about the questions for reflection, and she said to me, I liked the questions for reflection, but I did not like the questions for reflection. And I asked her, why is that? And she said, well, I guess there were a few things that I just didn't want to think about. But then I realized that I really do need to think about this. And, unwittingly, she summed up the reasons why I have those questions for reflection in there, because if there's something that you really don't want to think about, then maybe that's an indication that you probably should. Caregiving really presents us with some tough circumstances and choices and things that we want to avoid. But if you approach the realities of caregiving and really dig deep, you can reach a point that you can be a little bit more proactive in your caregiving experience. I mean, by its very nature, caregiving is reactive, but there are things that you can do proactively to make the experience better for yourself and your loved one.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple of comments on what all you said. I love that she said, well, I like them, but not so much. Because it's okay when you're looking at somebody else's life, but when you have to kind of go deep and reflect and go, okay, I got to be honest with myself and my situation, and that might mean I need to make some changes. And I think it's real easy for us to try to avoid all of that. I loved your titles because they are very concise, and I can only imagine how concise the book is, given that you honed those the chapter titles down. And I really do. I think those reflection questions are so important, because if we just go into it looking at this is for somebody else, and this is just knowledge for me for somebody else, we've really lost a huge learning opportunity to grow and to analyze, how do we want to be cared for? What's important to us? Because, it could happen to us. We could be the next one that needs some help. and to be able to have those honest conversations with loved ones. That could be anything from, end of life to, permanent disability to maybe short-term inconvenience of having some kind of disease or illness. None of us want to be in any of those positions. But again, that's part of living. And so I think that's great you did that.
Thank you. I love how you recognized it there as a really, it's a learning opportunity, Lori. And I'm not a medical doctor, but my doctoral degree is actually in learning and adult learning. So I've tried to incorporate principles of adult learning through these questions for reflection in the book. I think that these are a very distinguishing part of the book. It's not the type of book that attempts to be an encyclopedia and just give you all of the answers, because invariably in a caregiving situation, it's impossible to write an encyclopedia that gives you all the answers. Usually caregivers are in the best position to discover the answers for themselves, but they just maybe need someone to ask them the right questions.
Well, that's so true. And if somebody goes in thinking, okay, this is my manual for dummies, it's going to tell me exactly step by step, well, you're going to be gravely mistaken, because everybody's life is a little bit different. Everybody's role is a little different. Everybody's relationships are a little bit different. Our time, our energy, our finances, our resources, all of that stuff comes into play. And, it affects every cell of in your body and the essence of who you are from start to finish. And I think the journey itself, I was on it with my mom for 30 years. And as sad as it was for her to have dementia for that period of time, I learned so much. There were so many gifts wrapped in that for me. The levels of unconditional love I didn't know existed. You think you know what unconditional love is, and then you're kind of pushed of what really is that. And all of a sudden, for me anyways, I got to go to this really spiritual place. And these connections that I never thought would even be possible in terms of how we communicated and the comfort we gave each other, even when no words could be spoken anymore. So the lessons, I think, are far, deep, and wide. And when you're caring for somebody, I also think one of the things that you learn is, and there's a saying in dementia, what's good for dementia is good for the world. And I think the same thing applies just in general with caregiving. When you are caring well, all of those things you're doing can be applied in other ways in your life with other people, from children to neighbors to coworkers to bosses to friends to lovers. Doesn't make any difference. But you have to be open to looking at it in terms of, what are the gifts? There's got to be a reason we're going through this. There's got to be something to learn. And I think that that's one of the most powerful lessons in stepping in, is to allow yourself to experience, don't just experience the ugly side, the sad side, the grieving side, but, explore the joys and the possibilities and the ability to do things differently that you never would have thought of trying before, but now you have to because it doesn't work the other way. I think those are really cool things to be able to explore. I wanted to ask if there was one important piece of advice that you would give to family caregivers or care partners, care companions. There's so many words out there these days that would be really top of mind. If there's just one thing only that they would take away, what would that be?
Lori, I would say that as a family caregiver, you don't have to do this alone. It's okay to ask for help, to receive help. A lot of times family caregivers think that they have to shoulder this by themselves, and sometimes they pay the price for it in their own health and well-being and their emotional state. And they can get help either with the tasks of caregiving for their loved one or the type of emotional support that they might need themselves to continue in the caregiver role. And so when you're sharing with others and allowing them to give you the assistance that you need, you're going to be in a better position in the future to continue to support your loved one.
Yeah, and don't do what I did, which I didn't even know I was doing, but I think it's pretty common. I was the primary care partner for my folks, and I have an older brother and a younger brother, and I used to get just furious with them. Why aren't they around? Why aren't they helping more? What's going on? And then my dad died, and we had this conversation, and, I was talking about writing a book at the time. And I was sharing some stories, and I remember my older brother looking at me going, well, where'd you get all these stories? And my heart just sunk, and I felt so sad for him. And I'm like, oh, my gosh, he doesn't have what I have. He doesn't have these brilliant, wonderful stories because he wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we dug a little deeper as to why not. And then, they both said, well, they both looked at me, just cried and said, well, Lori, you're kind of a control freak. I remember just taking a deep breath and going, well, no, I'm not. I'm organized. There's a big difference. And they're like, no, you're really kind of a control freak. And so it really wasn't fun to try to help because we knew you'd be critiquing us and telling us how we didn't do it right. And I have to give them credit. I did. Because I wanted them to deliver care how I delivered care. And so that was like a huge learning curve and opportunity for me to go. And then I started kind of laughing at myself going, well, who the heck wants to be tied to anybody 24/7? I sure wouldn't want to be tied to me 24/7. And variety is the spice of life. Why am I limiting these relationships? Because they're important to my folks, and they would give them great joy instead of me being this little tickler of, well, why'd you get McDonald's? You could have made dinner, or you could have, done this, or you could have done that. Just stupid stuff that really didn't make any difference in terms of how my parents were cared for, and I didn't even know I was doing that. But I saw that as a huge kind of lightning rod moment. Have you heard from other families that kind of go through that too, or am I a lone duck out there?
Oh, that's very common, those types of feelings and experiences. Caregiving kind of pokes at the relationships within a family, and the book actually devotes 2 complete chapters to family relationships. The first chapter is on the relationship between the caregiver and the care receiver and how that relationship changes with the introduction of caregiving. And the second chapter, called Family, is about those other family members that may not be the primary caregivers, but are still in the picture and have relationships with both the caregiver and the care receiver. And the dynamics that come up between the families can be challenging. They can be very rewarding, but it'll teach you a lot about yourself. And just like you expressed with your brothers, you might learn some things about yourself and start to see yourself a little bit differently. And, when you were talking earlier, Lori, about the gifts that you received as a caregiver, I just loved what you said about, how you learned unconditional love and you grew spiritually and you were able to connect with your mother. Even at times when you weren't able to communicate with each other, you still were able to provide each other with comfort and communicate. You weren't able to speak. And, those dimensions of caregiving are found when you have devoted yourself to caregiving and you've started to kind of let yourself go and say, well, what's
Mm-hmm.
in this? What can I gain from this? What can I learn from this experience? And getting beyond the anguish and the frustration and the hurt. And that's where some of the greatest blessings of caregiving are.
Yeah, I remember just sitting on the couch with my mom, saying no words, but just feeling that was the safest place in the world, because she didn't judge, she didn't, none of that, and it was like, wow, and think, I want our audience to really think, what really gives you comfort? Sometimes it's the smallest, littlest thing that we take for granted, but it's really the most important. When you feel like someone's your security blanket, or you can just breathe and be your authentic self, that's a huge gift. And we've kind of stomped that out in society in a lot of ways. And, for me too, and my audience has heard me speak of this before, but I just think it's so important. I was trying to be kind of super mom and didn't give anything up and just kept adding more and more stuff on my list when I was caring for both my parents and raising my daughter and married and working full time and volunteering and having extra people live in my house and the whole 9 yards. And, that's what most of us are. We don't take anything off the plate. We just keep adding to it. And I got really short with my mom one day and I snapped and I felt so bad because she just repeated the same question over and over, and I didn't want to make a game. I didn't think it was funny. I was exhausted. And the guilt I felt afterwards was horrendous. And I thought, I have to change. This is not who I want to be at all to anybody, especially my mom. And it made me realize that I was so focused on the task and getting all these things done, I had forgotten about the person. I'd forgotten about the relationship. And so I had to shift, and I created a tool called Your Memory Chip, and it asks, what do you need to focus on? And when I interviewed people all over the world, everybody had a checklist or a job description. This is what I got to do. But there wasn't a human connection to it. And so I still had my checklist, but first and foremost, I came down to 3 things that I had to focus on, and that was she safe, was she happy, and was she pain-free? Because that was critical to her, and that I could do or not do or adjust how I do the things on my list. But it was really about taking the time to let that relationship just simmer in love and really put her first. I think a lot of times when we're giving care, we think we're putting them first, but we're putting the task maybe first in our priority list, but it's not necessarily always about the person first. Any comments on that thought?
Well, Lori, I think you really hit it on the head. There's so much focus on the tasks of caregiving, and this is true even in professional caregiving roles. You think about doctors and nurses and aides that work in facilities. We have so much to do all the time to provide care for the person that we're responsible for, and rightfully so. We should focus on the tasks of caregiving, but caregiving also helps us to appreciate the present moment and the opportunity that we have with the time that's remaining with your loved one to just be with them and and value the relationship that you have with them, to create new memories given the circumstances that you have left. And when you know that your time is limited, the significance of the time that you spend takes on an entirely new meaning, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And so you just gain a much greater appreciation of the present and taking time with your loved one, deliberately taking time and choosing to not worry as much about the tasks of caregiving, but just to appreciate the relationship that you have with your loved one can be extremely valuable and important. Because I'll tell you what, when your loved one is gone and has passed away, those are the moments that you're going to remember. I mean, time will sort of soften some of that that anguish and the heartache and the frustration and maybe some of the bitterness and the guilt that you feel. But you'll also value and appreciate forever those moments where you said, wow, I was present with my loved one, and what a gift that was.
Yeah, it's magical. It just and it slows you down, Anyways, for me, when they had to slow down, then I slowed down, and it taught me that I didn't have to answer back then my pager or my phone, or the world would still spin even if I stepped out for a few hours and ignored the rest of it, and that was a huge gift to me too. To let go and reprioritize, who do I want to be as a human being, and how do I want to be accessible 24/7 to the world, and why is it okay for others to rest but not me? And it sounds kind of silly, but I got in that mode anyways of, it's important. Everything was important, and it's like, in the big scheme of things, what's still going to be here tomorrow and what's not.
Yeah. In the book, there's actually a chapter on time and the implications of time when it comes to caregiving. And you've really touched on some of those just in your offhanded remarks there, Lori. And I really admire caregivers who choose to use the time that is available in ways that will lift and help the care receiver, help their loved one to be inspired, to be as happy as they can be in the moment. And, I think of a daughter who I knew through my home care company. She was taking care of her father, and he was near the end of his life, and he had spent his time on a horse farm. That's where he lived most of his life. And because of his condition, he couldn't be a part of the horse farm anymore, and he was in a facility, and she took him out. One day it was a lot of effort for her, but she was able to get him out of the facility and take him to a horse farm. And there in his wheelchair, he just watched the horses run around, and that just made his entire day. For her, it was completely worth it just to see the look on her father's face as he was outside with the horses. And she always has remembered that. And I'm sure that her father did as well. And so, things like that, where if you can create opportunities for your loved one to participate in activities that they enjoy or that are part of their identity, it can be really meaningful for your loved one and also for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I want to talk to you about too is your company, Caregiving Kinetics, and I know that you do some speaking and consulting. First, can you explain the name Caregiving Kinetics and why you chose it?
Oh, thank you for asking me about that. I actually thought a lot about the name of the company, and I chose the name Caregiving Kinetics because I'm trying to take a phenomenon of natural physical science and apply it to a social thing, caregiving. And when you think about kinetic energy, it's the transfer of energy from one body to another, a body in motion. And in caregiving, that is what's happening often. There's an energy that is being shared between the caregiver and the care receiver, and they influence one another. And I think there are just a lot of lessons to be learned if you think about how kinetics could represent caregiving. So that's what's behind it.
Okay. Well, and, one of the things that we hear all the time is, that a lot of times we'll blame the person we're caring for, especially a person with dementia, if they're frustrated or angry or not understanding something. And typically, a lot of times, they were perfectly fine until we walked in the room. And what they're doing is just mirroring back our nonverbals, that we think we're covering up with our Stepford, wife smile, and they're reading everything else and spitting it back out, and then we're blaming them. And it's like they were relaxed, they were comfortable, they were fine. You brought the agitation into the room yourself. And I think that's a huge gift I learned too during this process of, looking deeper at myself and what is the state of my being, my emotional state, and is it, are people able to read that physically, even when I think I'm hiding it? And it's pretty hilarious how often people can, because we don't really even know what we're doing. We don't know we're rolling our eyes. Or my daughter used to call me out on that too. And I'm like, what? I didn't do anything. Mom, you just rolled your eyes and you did a big huff. I'm like, no, I didn't. Yeah, you did, Mom. Yeah, you did. Don't tell me you're okay with this. I know you're not.
Yeah. And I think family members are especially in tune with those things. As subtle as we may think they are, our family members know all of those little subtleties and can probably discern that a lot easier than, somebody out in public.
Yep. Well, or even someone who's disabled picks up on that, because they see it so often, and then they watch for it, and they go, "There's another person who's, disrespecting me or not valuing me or whatever it might be," and it's so important for us to be in tune with that, because we know on the other side what that feels like. It feels horrible, to be that person who is getting these mixed messages, and not feeling valued or not feeling welcomed, or, whatever the situation might be. So let me get back to what I wanted you to talk about, and then I sidetracked us there on your speaking and consulting, and what type of offerings do you have for individuals or companies?
Yeah, so through Caregiving Kinetics, I do offer speaking engagements that can be either keynote addresses in conferences, or it can be workshops. I speak to paid formal caregivers, and these could be healthcare professionals in hospitals or in long-term care facilities and home health care, or also unpaid informal caregivers, family caregivers, and organizations that serve them. So with the book, I'm looking at doing more caregiver support groups. The book is very conducive to caregiver support groups because of the way it's structured, with the different chapters and the questions for reflection. Caregiver support groups could easily go through the chapters and review the questions as a collective group, and learn from one another and have that shared experience. And I also am very happy to join them either in person or virtually to discuss the book or answer questions. I have a presentation as well that I can give. So those are the types of things that I do on the speaking side. I also do executive coaching and team building and organizational development for care organizations. Okay, wonderful. One of the questions I was going to ask you was, do you do virtual, given the whole COVID thing? And you answered that. The other thing that you might want to try is just developing a book club for review, which might have a little different connotation than a support group. Some people might feel a little more comfortable entering that realm because it's talking about the book, and they don't think that they're going to have to go deep. But then usually with books and things that you're reviewing, you do, but it's just a different phrase. I know that there can be so much pushback in terms of just the name support group. Even with our memory cafes, like I said in the intro, I hate calling it a support group because it really is a gathering of friends. And there's that's a great suggestion. Yeah, different routes there, but. And I know that books are flying off the shelf these days. During COVID, people are looking at different ways to look at things. And, you could even take your book in terms of just the racial split in the country and stuff, and what's going on with our cultural differences and things, because it all ties in. It's all about how we care. Excuse me, and how we're viewing things there. So excuse me, I have to take a drink. Yeah.
So if you want to fill in a couple of words, I'm choking at this end here.
Well, I actually I wrote a blog post over the summer about how caregiving exemplifies the type of connection and healing that our society needs right now as a whole. And when you think about what caregivers do, they look upon the needs of the care receiver and meet the care receiver where they are and try to understand what those needs are and then reach out and help. And over time, the caregiver and the care receiver are they're aware of one another's weaknesses and imperfections, right? But there's this acceptance of one another that develops and emerges in a caregiving relationship. And I think that's really a beautiful metaphor for how we as a nation can move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely need some healing. And that was one thing we didn't touch on. And, we've got about 9 minutes left here, but I think it's an important one is, with my family, I was really close to my mom and dad. We had a great relationship, but not everybody's relationship is like that. So there are going to be sometimes you are tapped on the shoulder to care for maybe somebody you don't really like, somebody who hasn't treated you really well during this journey. Does your book get into that at all when you talk about relationships and things?
It does. In fact, I have a whole passage about imperfect relationships. And there are situations like that where, there are estranged family members and now maybe it's an adult child and a parent. And now because of the parent's healthcare needs, the child who's been estranged is being asked to step up and get involved and help with caregiving. And that can create a lot of hard feelings. It could dredge up a lot of painful memories. And, the family member needs to kind of look within themselves and decide, am I going to do this or not? And the one thing that I've really learned about this from seeing thousands of families go through this with my home care company is not to judge. I have not walked in the shoes of another person. And, who am I to say that this person should or should not be doing more for their loved one? There are so many different situations out there. But the one thing that I've also seen is sometimes those estranged relationships can make progress, and there's a certain amount of healing and forgiveness that can happen at end of life. And again, that's one of the things that can come out of caregiving that is often unanticipated.
Yep. I loved how you labeled it imperfect relationships, because really every single relationship is pretty much imperfect at some stage of the game. Just depends on the level of dysfunction. And I mean, it can be, it can be abuse, physical, sexual, emotional. It could be drugs and alcohol. I mean, it could be all neglect. It can go on and on and on, or it could just be, we just didn't get along that well. We didn't accept one another for who we were, and lines were drawn. And given that possibility to be able to heal that, and you'll never know unless you try. I remember having a woman call me one time, and her mom was dying, and she ended up the daughter ended up getting breast cancer. And so she had to step back for like 9 months while she was getting treated, and her sister stepped in. And when she came back, her mom was just in the fetal position and wouldn't talk. And she's like, I don't know what to do, what to say. And I said, crawl in bed with her and give her a hug and tell her how much you love her. And she's like, oh, we're not that kind of family. Mom's never been like that. We were always just, we weren't big huggers. And I said, you have to do what you need to do. And so she did it, and I remember being at a conference, and I came back up, and my phone was just blowing up, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And here it was this gal, and she said, oh my gosh, she gave me the biggest hug and told me she loved me, and it was the best thing ever. And she said, I'm going to cry. She said, I wish my mom would have loved me the way you loved me.
Oh.
And she changed
so awesome.
the whole trajectory of how she was going to be a mother to her child. And in what she gave as a gift to her mom. Listen to me, whoop. But it's just the possibilities of healing over just taking a risk of doing what your heart tells you to do. You know, to me, it's really important to take that risk because you're not going to know if you don't. You're just never going to know.
You're exactly right. And you brought tears to my eyes, Lori. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Those are the types of things where, you know, the woman was, she was just so distraught and uncertain and confused and didn't know what to do. And there was a lot of hurt that was inside of her heart. And she decided to just let it go and to give her mom what she needed in that moment. And it sounds like it had a profound effect on her. And that's a beautiful thing.
And she was so afraid her mom was going to be mad and angry or push her away. And she's like, I just don't know if I can handle that. And I said, you know, I've heard it so many times. And I said, I can't promise you. I said, but so many times I've heard from our elders that say, you know, I wish I would have done it differently. You know, but they were following the lead of their parents. You know, and which is pretty common. Erin, I can't believe our hour is just about up. I want to make sure that we get people your contact information. Now, you are on Twitter as Erin Blight, and that's AARON BLIGHT. And then your website is caregivingkinetics.com. And your email is Erin@caregivingkinetics.com as well. Are you on Facebook too, Erin?
Yes, they just started a Facebook author page for me with the new book. So I think I have like 9 people that are following it. But yes, it's Erin Blight, author.
Okay. So I tried to tag you, but I didn't see anything come up. But I'll I will try to join the followers there. And, you know, for our audience, I would really recommend that you check out this book, When Caregiving Calls. And you know what? It's always knocking at your door. You might not recognize it as caregiving, but no matter how you're interacting with people, you're showing how you care. And so let this guide you, you know, if you're caring for a parent, a spouse, an aging relative, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a friend. You know, it doesn't have to be a certain title in order to fall under a criteria of being a caregiver. And so don't let that limit your thoughts. I love the idea of the reflective questions. And again, no one's going to be there scoring it. And if you decide you don't want to do it, don't do it. But I think you'll learn a lot about yourself in that process. So again, thank you, Erin. Any last minute comment? We've got about a minute left.
I'd just like to thank you, Lori, for having me on the show, and I'd like to thank your listeners for listening. And it's just been, I can't believe the hour flew by here like this, but I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you.
Well, me too. And for our listeners, you can always find more information about Alzheimer Speaks just by going to our main website, alzheimerspeaks.com. Lots of great resources there. And hopefully in the next month or two, we're going to be rolling out a new site that'll be even easier to maneuver. And until this Thursday, when I interview the director and producer of the film Determined. We'll talk soon. Take care, everybody. And don't forget to share this episode. It was an important one. Bye now.
Well, hi, I'm Lori La Beywith, and I wanted to tell you about Alzheimer Speaks, which is another great podcast. You see, my own mother lived with dementia for 30 years, and I felt lost. Did you know every 3 seconds someone in the world is being diagnosed with dementia? Odds are it's going to hit your families too. We want to help you connect to services, products, tools, research, and stories so you can be prepared. Please subscribe to Alzheimer Speaks on your favorite podcast platform.